going to call this meeting of the Homelessness Committee to order. We're going to start with introductions, starting with Mr. Peterson.
Pete Peterson, Assembly.
Suzanne LaFrance, Assembly.
Felix Rivera.
Forrest Dunbar.
Christopher Constant.
Jim Steele.
Josh Duran, Park Superintendent.
Linda Garrison, Campbell Park Community Council, Homeless Committee.
Zach Burgess, Institute for Community Alliances.
Christy Dutt, Coordinated Entry.
Doug Lampkin, Ag Commission.
Carrie Collins, Alaska Housing Finance Corporation.
Colleen Bickford, U.S. Housing and Urban Development.
Lisa Caldera, Mother Francis Shelter.
Eric Glad, American Civil Liberties Union of Alaska.
Casey Reynolds, ACLU.
Arnie Rivera, Justice Center, UAA.
Melinda Freeman, Department of Health and Human Services.
Okay, thank you. So moving on to item number 3 under business. Before we get to 3A, just want to make a quick comment about public comment. So for items that are on the agenda, I am happy to allow members of the public to comment. I'm going to ask that the comments be precise and on topic. Otherwise, audience participation is for public comment on a general topic. Flag me if you want to speak and I'll add you to the queue. For public speaking for the first time, just for the record, if you could state your first and last name and which part of town you live in. After that, just for clarity of the record, state your first name. So moving on to item A1, Community Forum on Substance Use Services. And if we could just add for the record, we have Assembly members Eric Croft and John Whittleton have arrived. Okay, so Ms. Burke is getting the mayor, and I think she was going to do item number 1, so we will wait for her to get back. So just moving on to a general committee discussion. I have a few items I want to discuss, and then I want to open it to the committee. So first, Assemblymember Trainee wishes he could be here, but he is at a funeral he could not attend. And just for the record, I want to note that Mayor Ethan Berkowitz is here. Thank you, Mayor, for attending. Mr. Trainee was, during our committee discussion, going to bring up a article which he passed on to me, and titled Is Utah Still a Model for Solving Chronic Homelessness? I'm just going to briefly give you the gist of it in 3 points. First, Housing First in Utah is working, but drug addiction issues are making it tough to handle. Roughly 15 to 20% of the failures in Housing First, 15 to 20% of everyone in Housing First in Utah is failing, and that's due to drug addiction. Also, second, there is a need to deal with non-chronic homelessness before they become chronically homeless. And Utah is starting a program called Homes Not Jails, based on a paper success model to do so. And then third and finally, the changing definitions of what chronically homeless means has made it hard to efficiently measure success in Utah. So those are the 3 things that I got from the article. I'm happy to share that with members after this meeting. Yes, absolutely. Then I have given you all documents of basically the statement of mission. It's also in your first page. Based on comments from members of the committee and the community, I've drafted, emphasis on draft, a potential new statement of mission that I'd like for us to discuss, and we can use this as the springboard for this discussion. In short, that new statement focuses on a 3-legged stool strategy for this committee, specifically focusing on tangible action versus education, which is the difference between the previous statement of mission and this statement of mission. So you can read in there what that entails, but just going through the 3. First is acting on projects and policies which the Assembly and the Anchorage community believe will eradicate homelessness. 2, convening stakeholder groups to discuss and resolve barriers to the goals set by the Assembly and administration. And finally, 3, assisting in the success of the administration's efforts. So this is an attempt to springboard conversation, and just to make sure we maintain the agenda, I'm just setting a timer, and I want to open it up to the committee to discuss those items. And yes.
Question, how is the new statement of mission different from the previous statement of mission?
Yes. So the previous statement of mission is an emphasis on education through this committee to allow the Assembly to efficiently allocate resources. That's the gist of the previous statement of mission. As Assembly members LaFrance, myself, and Constance and Steele recognized from this last campaign cycle, it's become apparent that the community wants us to move beyond education to taking action. So that's the intent of this updated statement of mission. I just want to make sure that members of the audience and Mayor and Ms. Burke, if you have that proposed statement. Okay, so one of the things that we had talked about in our a meeting that Mr. Croft led was sort of the need to do sort of work plans and strategic plans. I use the term strategic plan loosely to help sort of determine what these committees should do. So I would like to use this potential new statement to springboard what a potential work plan for this committee might look like, and we can have that discussion. I would like it to be a facilitated discussion at a future meeting, so that we can talk about tangible steps that this committee wants to take. So any thoughts or discussion on that?
I think it passes unanimously.
My only note on that is I'll have some stylistic suggestions later.
Okay, thank you.
Nothing content.
And once the public has had a chance to review that, if you have any thoughts, please let me know. But for now, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Burke for the Community Forum on Substance Use Services Summary of Outcomes. Do we have that available?
The community forum happened on April 19th and was a convening around a survey of service providers in the community in terms of their treatment plans and what may happen with our site, the municipal site out at Cliff Road. It was a bit of a process meeting where we reviewed survey results from the service providers around what they thought they could provide or where they felt they were going in the future, in an effort to help us with some of the due diligence on scoping the project of how much of support services might we offer at the Cliff Road site and make sure that we're leveraging those treatment services as much as possible. And that is really a kickoff of a process that the municipality will help facilitate around our site at Point Warrenzoff, but also with some other providers who are scoping treatment services right now to make sure that we're all going together and making the best use of limited resources. So that there will be some pre-development work over the summer that I'd like to report to the committee and make sure that, at least in the last version of this committee, the focus was on access to treatment overlapping with concerns around how treatment needs impact the homeless population more than maybe some other populations. And that focus, as I think that article about Utah, it strengthens our approach that we're going to keep treatment as a main component of our homeless services array. So we will be bringing some of the pre-development information in terms of the site back to the committee and make sure that we're keeping you informed and part of the conversation around what might happen at Point Warrenzoff.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Nancy, was there can you give a preview of any kind of consensus or any thought of specifically what kind of treatment will be out there? Are we talking long-term treatment, short-term treatment, detox? Was there any sense of what that group was expecting to go to Clitheroe?
There was quite a bit of talk about long-term versus short-term treatment, and then the other topic that comes up bundled with this conversation is access to detox, which is detox is the first step of treatment, so you can get someone safe and then they can access treatment resources. And it's really it's in process in the community right now, who's doing what, because detox is changing providers at the moment, and then new things will be coming up following that between CITC and South Central Foundation. But there is recognition that the current Clitheroe site does up to 90 days, which is valued for people to have that amount of time in a setting that's a little bit removed from the city, the urban sort of site where people have been. That is a valued component, and so we'll want to continue looking at that. But there are a lot of structures under Medicaid services right now that are changing that will also inform what's feasible. So we have to do this mix of sort of looking at what we can pay for and what's needed, and do a crosswalk of those.
So just a quick follow-up, Mr. Chairman. So last week we took a number of votes to help the new facility out of Eklutna go forward. Is that South Central? That's
CITC.
CITC,
Yes.
right? So are CITC and South Central were they both present at this 19th meeting on 19th? Are they
Yes.
actively involved with this?
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes, Mr. Johnson.
What providers were there?
I apologize, I didn't do a formal report on this. I'll compile it. There were probably, we had, I'm trying to remember the numbers now, close to 70 people, I think. It was at the Mountain View Library, and that
I was out of state, I'm sorry.
facility was. I will get the sign-in sheet, and then we do have a few of the process notes back. I'll compile that into a report and send it to the committee.
Mr. Croft.
So, the point in count time, you prepared those numbers for January 24th?
This is part of an update that I'll be doing next around. These are our numbers for the point in time, and this is the community. The Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness is our lead on the COC, and they prepare these numbers.
So you want to do that later? You've got that.
I have a little bit of an update on it too that I think is important.
And you'll have comparisons to prior. Then?
I do have the prior units.
Then I'll wait on that. And you want comments on the overall mission statement or measures later? Yeah.
I mean, we have time for discussion now, if we want to have that discussion, Mr. Croft.
I guess then briefly, I appreciate the direction you're going. I think you're absolutely right that the community wants, the educating is fine, but they want more action. And so moving in that direction makes a lot of sense. Your 3 points, I'm still trying to understand how. So acting on projects and policies, the assembly and entertaining, convening, which is more of an educational function but appropriate, and then assisting in the success. Sort of what exactly, I was looking at the verbs, what exactly do we expect to do, and how will we know when we've done it?
Yes, that's great. So one of the things that I wanted to do, Mr. Croft, at a future meeting was, this idea of the work plan or a loose strategic plan that had objective metrics in it, so that we would know if we had actually done something so we could report back to our constituents. So this is, again, just a springboard so that when we do have that future discussion, we can really talk specific metrics.
Good, okay, let's do that, thank you.
Thank you. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, on that one thing and then back to Nancy, but, in the beginning of the committee years ago now, it was discussed, Bill Evans clearly stated that it was to be a committee based on action. And it just seemed really difficult to get there. And it became a process of education over long term. And so I think it's a really important ideal to move to action. And I don't know how we do that, that's Eric's point, but just that was discussed very clearly at the beginning of the committee 2.5, 3 years ago. It just, there's a lot of education that had to be done. So, Nancy, the chair, I am very pleased to hear now, and this for the group as a matter of full disclosure, I work for a treatment provider, and so professionally speaking, I'm involved in this issue at a pretty root level. And for the years running up to when this mayor was elected and this work started, I found a lot of disrespect in the community for people who are treatment providers. Like sneering in the community, oh, you treatment first people are horrible and blah, blah, blah. This community dialogue was pretty brutal. And I want to thank you for hearing what you just said, that this is now being integrated into the discussion, because what a lot of people have been saying all along is that's a critical element. And thank you for finally starting to move it into the fore of the conversation, because there has been a faction of people saying all along, this has to be part of the approach. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Whittleton.
Well, now I'm intrigued. So who was complaining about treatment providers? The people you were treating or other people? And what were they?
The people who are advocating for funding for Housing First programs, right? It was a competition for resources, right? There's only so many resources available. So those who believed that Housing First was the way religiously and zealously, many of their members, maybe not their central members, the people who are leading, but members of the community, I would hear very clearly state in a way that was very disrespectful, you treatment first people just don't understand. And so, that again, I'm not attempting to smack backhand at anyone. I'm saying thank you, because it seems like we're evolving together into a system that's going to work.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Thank you, Mr. Whittleton. And Ms. Burke.
I just want to say that I think that does characterize the nature of the conversation at the time, but for those working on these projects, one of the reasons that Housing First was pursued was in recognition that people who are not housed, who are on the streets, sometimes are not able to access treatment immediately because of all of the negative outcomes of being homeless and needing some time to stabilize before making meaningful use of treatment. It's always been the intention that then treatment comes in the right mix for the person at the whatever stage they're at. But I do think in the advocacy for Housing First, because it didn't exist in the community, there was a lot of support for that in a harm reduction model, which works for a certain percentage of the people, but a majority of the people need treatment and need to get to treatment. So it was a matter of a gap-filling measure to make sure we had Housing First for those that couldn't access treatment at the time. And in fact, our programs talk about the fact that tenants who are stabilized can access treatment from housing, which is amazing. So it creates doorways for people that didn't exist before.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Mr. Steele.
I would think logically it would be detox first, and then housing, and then long-term treatment. It just seems logically that would be the process.
So one of the things I remember learning when I was in college, I didn't actually take the course, my roommates did. But I had to listen. I had to listen to them. And they took a course on environmental systems, and the three salient points about any system, which is what we're talking about here, is that you can't do just one thing. All things are connected, and there is no way. And all of the idea that we can view any component of addressing either homelessness or addiction issues in isolation is overly simplistic. And one of the things that we're endeavoring to do is make sure that we are welding together the disparate components that are necessary to solve the problem.
And is this all a voluntary effort? In other words, the people have to be willing, or is it court committed or something like that?
There are a lot of elements. Many of the people out at the current Cliff Road Treatment Center have court orders to be there. But I like the way that Seattle describes that the dynamic that you just said. The logical thing is detox, then treatment, then housing, or detox, then housing, then treatment in one of those orders. That's a traditional way of accessing treatment and works for a percentage of the people. Seattle puts it at around 70%. And they say that system works well for people who have something to lose still. But for those who have nothing to lose, those stair-step kind of things that
Just leave me alone.
they're lost. I mean, they don't have anything left to lose. So, I would say it just depends on where the person is in terms of their addiction, their health, and their mental illness.
Thank you, Ms. Kirk. Thank you, Mr. Steele. Final comment, Mr. Constant.
To the mayor's point, and Tim, for your edification, it's more like housing, treatment, detox, housing fails, treatment, detox, housing fails, treatment, and stable for a while. It's just a dynamic system, whatever the individual needs. And some of them are forced in, but the outcomes are the same, doesn't matter how you get there. It's once you get engaged, and stability is the key. That's what I understand the system to be, very non-linear.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. So for the purposes of the record, I think we had a few individuals come in from the audience. So if we could have any new audience members identify themselves first, last name, and the organization you're with. So I know we have Lisa Kino.
Lisa Kino, Catholic Social Services.
Sherry Laurie, Downtown Soup Kitchen, Hope Center. Debbie Bitney, Rasmussen Foundation.
Susan Mustande, Division of Behavioral Health.
Thank you. So one last thing before we move on to the mayor's report. I entertained this idea with several members and with the Assembly Chair training who needed to approve this of adding 2 ex officio members to this committee to basically broaden the community's, the Anchorage community as a whole's dialogue into this committee. So there are 2 ex officio members that I got approval to include. One from the HAND Commission, which was, as we recently reformed, the Housing and Homelessness and Commission, and then one from the Federation of Community Councils. I will be going tonight to give a presentation to the Federation and allowing them to nominate an individual to join as an ex officio member of this committee. So with that, I would like to invite Mr. Lampkin to join us at the table, the chair of the HAND Commission, if you would, please. Thank you. And then we're going to move on to the mayor's report.
Are you giving him a hand?
Always a joke.
That was for the mayor.
Keep working on it. Don't give up the day job.
Yeah.
We're better too.
So far. Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. It's a pleasure to be able to say that. And also congratulations to all the other new members, as well as the old members. That was for you. You see. Before I begin my report, I want to say that our goal is to solve homelessness, not to manage it. And we're approaching the problem with that in mind. And the progress is not as rapid as I would have liked it to be. We are attempting to make sure that we have coordinated response from a disparate group of providers across an array of agencies and governmental organizations. But ultimately, we're trying to make sure that we're connecting housing and services with people who are on the street and in camps, because we have a finite problem in Anchorage. we can identify individuals by name, and we ought to be able to solve the problem for them by name. I tease Nancy and my friends in the provider universe that if we could just find housing for one person a day, just one a day, with all these agencies that we have out there bringing their muscle to bear on the problem, we go a long way towards fixing the problem. And I think as, you know, right now there's an opportunity, particularly as the state is grappling with its uncertain fiscal condition and the resources that it has to apply to helping us solve the problem. If the state can expedite some of the processes that it has with us in terms of vouchers, we can move people out of the emergency situations that they oftentimes find them in and stabilize them and put them on a safer, healthier trajectory. So, in a lot of ways, that old adage of lead, follow, or get out of the way applies. We are leading, and we are appreciative that there are so many partner agencies in the community, and we are continuing to convene those agencies and to make sure that we are making steady progress towards solving the problem. But I will continue to encourage the state in particular to make sure that its resources are expedited and coordinated with what we're attempting to do.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So I think I have probably 15 minutes left, is that? And I have a slide on this. I wanted to go through a longer presentation, but I think I will skip to the good parts, if you will. But there is a longer presentation, particularly for the new members. If there's a desire, we can walk through it at a slower pace than what I'm going to breeze through right now. So there's two things that I think we'll really focus on. One is that the point-in-time count numbers, our official HUD count has concluded, and all of the processes that need to happen to make sure that those numbers are ready to report up to the federal government have been completed, and so we have that report now. And there's a couple of important caveats that I want to point out around that report. And then the second one is some changes that are happening in the service delivery system around program and some housing to focus on. So if that's okay, I think I'll go straight to my slide. Let's start with this one. This is our 2016 and 2017 unsheltered outreach count. And if you look on the documents, so there's a methodology that happened in the community first in 2012, and when we started our initiative, we picked up this effort to document persons that we find outdoors on the night of the count. The way that this works for homeless data is HUD requires communities to do a count of all of the homeless within the community on a single day, a point in time snapshot count. It happens the last Wednesday in this community. We do the count on the last Wednesday of January every year, and we count where people resided the previous night, Tuesday night.
You're welcome to join us.
Yeah, and so we made it a large community event, just as the Homeless Coalition did in 2012, with a whole number of volunteers. Our two counts that we've run had 190 volunteers and 150 volunteers. And we've gridded the community into about 17 different grids now. We've connected those grids with the GIS mapping system, so when we find people in the community, we're able to do a survey or do an observation of that person in a phone, and then it drops a GIS pin. So we now have locations of where we found people. We also track the camps in the same way. We've been able to view or count In 2016, there were 118 people that were outdoors, unsheltered on that night. 17 of those individuals were between the ages of 18 and 24. In 2017, that outdoor count went down to 79, with 11 of those individuals being between 18 and 24. So that was the unsheltered visual count of individuals. On the document here, you see some slightly higher numbers that report in this middle number here. The HUD count is 240. So in 2016, our number was 118, their number is 240. The reason that this happens is there's two data sources that are used for this HUD count. One is a large event that happens at the Egan Center called Project Homeless Connect, where service providers, it becomes like a resource fair for homeless individuals to get connected to services in one setting. It's like a one-stop shop model. It's a great event. It captures a lot of people, but there is a self-report survey that happens at that event that asks the question, where did you sleep last night? So the delta between these two numbers is the difference between the people that we viewed or counted in the community and the ones that self-reported sleeping outside. There's a margin of error on our number 118. That's not an exact number. Of course, we missed people. There were people maybe that were moving and we didn't capture them. But that is a much higher number on that 240. So we're using our visual count numbers as a balancing number for that 240.
Ms. Burke, I have a couple of questions.
Okay.
Mr. Dunbar.
Just very quickly, I think you mentioned it, Nancy, but I apologize, I missed it. That 2016 number, is that also a January count number, or is that end of summer count number?
This is January to January.
Okay, so this is good time series.
Yes.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Constant.
Yep. So there's some sort of substantial difference. I assume the 240 is not my name, is it?
Correct.
Yeah, so the 118 is my name, and the 79 is.
Well, some by name and some just by visual. They either refused a survey with us, or we were driving past and we saw them and counted them. But they were visual. That's a visual count, is what's important about that.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Croft.
So am I right that there might be a double count between somebody you spotted and then somebody went to the Project Homelessness?
Oh, I forgot to mention, there's one other piece about our methodology. There's unlikely to be a duplication there because our visual count begins at 4 a.m. with this idea that we will catch people before they move from their location to try to get breakfast or to get warm in the morning. It goes between 4 and 8, and then the Project Homeless Connect event opens at 9.
So there could be duplication in the HUD number.
That's all unduplicated.
Okay. So can we feel confident it's somewhere between the two? Between what you might have missed in a big count, but admittedly can't get everybody, to a HUD, could it be higher than the HUD number?
That would be unlikely.
Okay. And but the HUD is still unduplicated. That is, if somebody was counted in your count and then comes to the Project Homeless, somehow that gets rationalized.
We submit our spreadsheet to the HUD. The consultants who run this whole thing are ICA, and they're here with us today. So those are pulled out.
Which should I use?
Somewhere in between, I think, would be probably the best thing to do. I don't feel we were 100% on capturing everybody in the community, but it's more solid, I think, to plan off of the visual count number than the HUD number.
One more take on that, and I'll stop. But so if they're non-duplicated in the HUD, why wouldn't I use the HUD number? Because it's at least that many. I thought there might be duplications, but if there's truly not, then isn't it at least 155?
I would argue that it's a challenge, and I'm not saying this. I don't have the right answer on this. We should decide this as a community, and as this committee, we should decide this. But in the HUD count, people are asked, where did you sleep last night? And they're at the Egan Center. So we have no verification of where they slept is where they slept. They may say in their car, and we've missed them in their car, so they would be it should be in the the verified column. But if we missed them, there's no way to know.
Is there a sense they'll only get services if they say I was in my car?
I think there's there is a general sense in the community that if you have a higher level of need, you will get services first. People will say that if you're down at the shelter or Beans Cafe, they'll say, I'm on the list, but I'll never be that severe. I won't make it to the top of the list. People will say that when you talk to them.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Dunbar.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, as a policymaker, when I look at these two data sets, regardless of which one we use, what's exciting is the delta, right? It looks like we are reducing by 30 or 40% the number of unsheltered individuals. But I know there's diminishing marginal returns to our efforts. It gets harder and harder. But in 2018, when we do this count, do you think we will continue to see a reduction?
If we bring on some more housing.
That's the goal.
Yeah.
I mean, the goal is to go to zero, or a functional zero. And the way that has to happen is, what we've done is we built the foundation where we're counting people, we're moving them around, we've taken sort of the readily available solutions that are in front of us, but we have to kick it up to the next level and get some bigger housing solutions, as well as connecting people to the support services that they've earned or entitled to in ways that we haven't been able to do in the past. The last couple of weeks, Nancy and I have started taking service providers out to the corners and making sure that they're connecting with people in a meaningful way. I think that's how you go get them, one at a time.
Thank you, Mr. Dunbar. Mr. Constant.
Yeah, thank you. So in this number, you don't have the housed component, you think that there are some folks who are housed in some of these units that have been developed over the last several years that are showing up, and just because of the opportunity, they'll say, yeah, I'm homeless. Do you think that happens, or is there a screening mechanism there, not in order to stop them from receiving goods, but to ensure that the count is fair and accurate?
There is a committee that's working on the Project Homeless Connect event and actually trying to make some decisions about the future of that event. And I would want to ask that question of the sponsors. It's been a number of years since I've worked on Project Homeless Connect. But I think that in general, there are a lot of people who are on the edge who come to Project Homeless Connect looking for resources to stay housed. And, self-report is a challenging tool.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Croft.
So what am I missing? Why don't the adults sheltered and the adults unsheltered add up to the total number of adults?
I skipped a column that you see in the middle here with transitional.
There's one more category.
Transitional housing shows up in HUD's count because it's not because it's time limited, and so communities still need to plan for those individuals. And so that's on this information sheet here.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Croft. Go ahead, Ms. Burke.
So I think, we've had an idea to have some more conversation around data and a data dashboard for the municipality. Obviously, these numbers are very important and seeming to trend in the right way. People ask about the detox numbers, the sleep-off numbers, seeming to trend in the right way as well. And while we can't say per person until we actually do that research, which we're trying to figure out a way to do, yes, our housing programs have resulted in these reductions, but we can generally say these strategies are heading in the right direction. We want to keep working them. We want to keep identifying barriers as the committee said they want to do, and to continue pushing these in the right direction. So just to say one other thing about what's happening in the community, the standing members have seen this chart. This is a chart of a screening tool that takes a look at mental health, addiction, and medical need for people who are in the homeless service delivery system. And this tells us about some of those needs, with 0 being a low need person, no medical problems, probably no mental health or addictions, or some that could be easily addressed. And then the high end being people who have long-standing addiction issues, severe mental illness, and probably medical problems all combined. This high end has been the focus of what Assemblymember Constant was saying, that the Housing First advocacy was really focused on those folks to gain stability and to help them see how far along the treatment continuum they may progress. The mid column is really the place where treatment can be very effective, and the length of how long that treatment is an interesting conversation for us to have as we go forward with the Clitheroe Center. So the challenge for the community is in this slide here. I'm sorry to slip through all of this, it really is. There's 3 things that you need to house people, whether it be in a single site project or in scattered site or across the community in market apartments. There's 2 different models that we work off of, and the key components are services, vouchers, and capital. You have to have the units available. You have to be able to cover rental subsidies, because these tenants are not likely to be working at least immediately. And then you have to have a service component. And the farther you get along that continuum of need, the bigger your service component needs to be. So this is just a very simplistic drawing of what housing programs what mix of services we might need in different levels of need of housing programs. So these bars are pretty low on that, our pretend housing, which is a triangle here for whatever reason. And then the mid-level, you need to have some deeper subsidies. You need to have vouchers that maybe go up to a year so that you can help people get stability and they can start working over time once they've completed treatment and hit some of their goals. And then the service component is moderate. It could maybe come and go. This is the mid bubble. The high bubble is the ongoing intensive need population, where you really need a generous service program. The concept of Housing First is one that really works off of an individual planning model. So each person is going to have their own timeline that they're going to be able to engage. So you have to have deep subsidies, you have to have units that are subsidized, and you have to have vouchers on these projects. If you don't have both of those in place, then your services need to make up the balance of resource needed to run the program. So you can have programs that have really generous service plans, like some of our tribal partners have very generous service reimbursement rates, so they can sometimes do a project that has fewer rental vouchers and fewer subsidies on the units. We see this in the Tanana Chiefs project in Fairbanks. They're able to keep their Housing First program going primarily through services and revenue generated. In our programs in Anchorage, there has been a very successful program called the Special Needs Housing Grant Program through Alaska Housing Finance Corporation, which was the result of advocacy around 2009 of people working on housing. And it provides all 3 of these components. The service component is smaller. It's a small grant that goes with the project. And then the idea is you can layer in other Medicaid services. Once that program ran out, we began to try to look at ways to put projects together using existing programs in the community and to pull in resources that were already in play in the community. And so one of the problems that we're having right now is the state has just finished a program called Intensive Case Management. It was called the Road Home Program in the agency that sponsored it with Rural Cap. That program is ending, although there is still some existing resource available through the state. There's some decisions going on right now that will change what's happening in that program. But one of the impacts that will happen is that the housing provider where the people are residing really needs that on-site piece management component. There's a service component that needs to stay with that project, but as the service component pulls out, and maybe a new service provider will come in, but the impact on the project itself is going to be it's going to be great. There's about $100,000 to $120,000 gap that will happen because the service component. So you can imagine if we lowered the service component, we would need something else to pull up and to cover the project. So we're going into July 1 with a $100,000 to $120,000 gap at that project. Even if there is a new service component that comes in, we still have that gap happening. On the project side, when you're thinking about why don't more people sponsor housing programs in this area, and it's because of this picture. It doesn't pencil without a really knowledgeable entity to pull together all of those pieces that need to make the project go. And that agency just gave pink slips to their clinicians who've now worked with people stabilizing in this program for about a year and a half, or maybe some if they were early 2 years, but there are some that are just being onboarded this past week. And so now you have a complete change in your service staff. You have new people coming in. You might have two agencies trying to pair together to provide a service to the tenant. There's a lot to get worked out, and there's going to be a gap for those tenants. So we've asked to have those tenants on somewhat of a watch list, and if we have people who are falling out of housing, we need to do some advocacy around that, because the change in services and our inability as the state and as a community to have a reliable business plan is going to impact the tenants. So I wanted to provide that update to the committee and to just make sure that we're aware of this coming change.
Mr. Constant.
Could you speak to, Nancy, the success of that ICM program relative to other programs and its efficacy at achieving all of these goals?
That program is a Housing First program, and the sponsor agency tells me that their stability is over 90%. So we heard that Utah has maybe a 15% rate of people not achieving stability. We're up over 90%. The national average is around 88%. I think the decreases that we've all been viewing in the sleep-off numbers is one of the main, this program is one of the main contributors to that trend going in the right direction. I understand there's a formal evaluation that's happening, and that'll be available maybe sometime near calendar year end.
And the evaluator is here.
The evaluator is here, and there's also a representative from the Division of Behavioral Health as well.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Croft.
Can you go back to the prior numbers slide, the HUD and the... Go all the way through. So how are we able to tell whether the number of adults declined by 60 odd because fewer homeless have come in, or you housed in a permanent way 60, or whatever the so as we see those numbers, I think when I am thinking about your question, Mr. Chairman, of how do we want to be active and how do we want to measure what we've done, you just described a very interesting program. We're not the experts in it. We're not going to tell you which programs to do. We want you to model after the neatest ones and tell us about it, but we're not going to tell you which ones necessarily, and probably want you experimenting with a lot of different models and then coming back and saying this one worked really well and we love it. So our job is more having a good way to tell whether the things you decided to do worked, and encouraging or funding those things that work. So do we have a number that is people we have put in permanent housing that have not needed housing level services in the last year?
So we have our team here. Christy Duff is our coordinated entry and HMIS system manager, and Zach is sitting next to her from our contractor ICA. And we had some of those numbers in draft, and I was planning to try to squeeze that into today's meeting, but we didn't have enough time. But the HMIS system that we're standing up actually will do that by person. And so we will be able to submit reports and it's great that you asked about how many people are coming into homelessness, because now we're able to track that because we're assessing people and we're onboarding them into a community homeless list rather than 7 different agencies having people on their individual agency wait list. So we will actually be able to provide a report, and there is a draft report that's pretty close that we can bring.
That feels like the right measure to me, but is it? I mean, is that the industry standard? You say we can measure success. One of the ways we measure success is people we have placed in permanent housing. They may have needed other services, WIC or something else, but they haven't needed housing services for a period of time.
Yes.
Okay, so if that number's coming up, I think that, because that starts to separate it, and then if they can tell us how many new people are coming in the system, we can say, we haven't done anything, the number of homeless coming into the system has declined, or we have done great, the number has either stayed steady or increased, and we have, the changes you see are actually getting them out of, because all the categories we have here, emergency, transitional, or unsheltered, are by definition either unsatisfactory or temporary solutions. We want to know how many we got help to get in the permanent solution that stayed there.
So that, I'm sorry, can I respond to that? That speaks to a dashboard that the municipality wants to have, and that's shared with our partners, United Way and the Homeless Coalition are, right here with us around really tracking that number. How many people did we house today? How many people did we house this month? How many people stayed housed?
And housed not sheltered or transitional, but how maybe transitional.
Permanent.
But yeah, permanent.
Yep.
Yeah.
Permanent. Well, that's the solution. This is the fix. This is how we're keeping people alive until we can get them to the solution.
Because adult sheltered going up is either good news or bad news. I can't tell, right? It's a temporary. It's better than unsheltered.
Correct.
But it's not the solution.
So, I'm sorry, can I respond again? You can cut me off anytime. This gets to a later agenda item around the strategy that we're taking with shelter, because we have the same shelter resources. We have Brother Francis, we have the Anchorage Gospel Rescue Mission for adults. But we have more people now that we're trying to drive that direction. So the strategy we took was to take a look at the total list of people in shelter, and are there subpopulations that we can connect to better service areas for them. So we're trying to figure out what to do with people over 65. We're connecting the people who have mental health issues with the mental health providers. But the ordinance request is trying to keep people in smaller settings so that we can get to know them better relationship, help them move on quicker. And so that's one of our strategies around shelters. How can we do better with what we have existing?
Thank you, Mr. Croft. I'll let the record reflect that Mr. Trainee has arrived. And then final comment before we have to move on to the next item, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, and thank you, Felix, Mr. Chair, and Eric. I think that Nancy alluded to the measure of success of keeping people in housing, and that was the 90% number that WellCap is reporting in contractor. That the ICM team was providing very measurable long-term success in keeping people off the street. So those measures are available specific to the providers and hopefully soon to the dashboard. So
I know you got to move on, but really the deltas between 85 and 90, that is, an average program is 85 and an exceptional is, it seemed like there would be bigger, I don't know, that a medium program would be 50 and a great program would be 85. But that's what we're fighting over?
that's really a Nancy question.
I'm sorry.
Do you want him removed?
I would ultimately suggest that's the difference between these programs targeting severe,
Because you're getting down to
the
really
very
hard.
hard end of people who are, very difficult to find.
You need reliability, you need stability, it needs to be a setting that the person, these are people who've been in program after program, I talked to a guy at Carlick Manor who'd been there for 4 years, and he said, yeah, every time I hear about the state cutting budgets or, something happened, I start picking out my campsite because he doesn't believe it's going to last.
The question was really between an average program and an excellent program is the difference between 85 and 90%. You were talking about an Utah study being average at 85 or...
That's what they're seeing across the country, yeah. For these really
and 90
intensive
being
focus-
good.
Yeah, well, we're pretty excited about theirs. Yeah.
So it means, okay, you do this all the time.
It's all local.
I apologize for the ignorance of the question, but then if every program's doing 80, is there that much to choose from? So it's really how you handle that really hard nut at the end, the really difficult people.
Oh, maybe I misspoke. The Housing First programs that are really pretty new across the country, focusing on this population of folks that are very visible in a lot of different communities who have this multiple need situation with medical problems, mental health problems, and addiction problems, which 75% of the people we rented up in the Carlick Manor had. How do you get the medical providers in? How do you get the substance providers in, the mental health providers in? It's very complicated. And so 88% retention was what they're seeing out of this new batch of programs.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Burke. Thank you, Mr. Croft. So moving on to the next item on the agenda, the data dashboard.
May I ask one last follow-up question on that for the committee
Yes.
for consideration? The change that's happening in this program could be very detrimental, and it could impact the direction we're heading. And it just occurs to me that we've never actually just asked the state to keep this program in place or to allow the municipality to continue on this program. And it probably would be a great thing for the committee to draft that ask or to collaborate with the mayor's office for that ask because of the detriment that's going to happen to those tenants.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Mr. Constant.
Hopefully the last time. I am in full agreement with that this committee really should and soon communicate to the commissioner and the governor that the best solutions are most likely local solutions, and that this team is more likely to make a better decision than is the division. And these funds were advocated for and secured by a community advocacy group not related to the homeless providers, and local is the answer. So I would hope to write that.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Mr. Steele.
Yeah, my question is, are those state funds at risk, and how much are they providing?
This was a pilot that the state provided, and it was funding that came through during the Parnell administration, and is a demonstration project. So these are entirely state general funds. There's not a federal component to these funds, and so it's the discretion of the state on how the program continues.
Are they earmarked in the budget at the moment, or are they?
It's already allocated. It's already allocated funding, so there's no new approval or anything that happens.
Thank you, Mr. Steele. So if there's no objection, I will be working with Mr. Constant and the administration to draft such a response. Okay, thank you. So moving on to the data dashboard.
So Brendan and I have been having this conversation about the data dashboard, and it looks like he might be pulled into Bloomberg visitors today around the municipal levers that we're going to want to monitor in terms of how our housing programs will go. And I'm excited about that part of the description where we will monitor the data and we'll decide together if the strategies are working or not, and decide better ones to do. So this point in time count information is important. I think getting to the number that the community is comfortable using in terms of the visual count and the HUD numbers, and that Project Homeless Connect event is a key piece of that. So I'm interested and anxious to participate with them in that number or in that conversation. So the data dashboard will appear on the Muni open data portal, and will have these numbers that we're all in agreement that we want to display out to the public on how this work is going. These head numbers are easy because these are already displayed out to the public on the Homeless Coalition's website. So these are public numbers. We think the sleep-off data is interesting data, helps us manage as the municipality resources needed to go toward not only the sleep-off center, but the van that travels around and picks up people who are in life-threatening situations. So that's an important number that has a budget consideration tied to it. I think the other conversations happening right now in the community with United Way and with the Homeless Coalition around the desire to have one place where the public might go to, if you're driving along and you wonder what is happening with our homeless work, that we could steer people to one location and they could see family information, veteran information, youth information, adult information, all in one. I don't want to use the word repository because for data people that means something that maybe I don't mean it to mean. One easy location for that data to be stored. So I think if it would be okay with the committee, if we can continue this conversation, Brendan is a key part of it. Maybe on the next agenda we might actually have the mock-up and walk through it with the committee. That would be great.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Burke.
Can I ask on that, do you have a draft of it? Is there a handout of the data dashboard?
It's an online tool.
Okay, the administration may want to provide the public a whole bunch of different data. I hope they do. They may want it for their own evaluations of specific data. We as a committee and as assembly are going to have to decide. And so I'm worried that if she continues a process that maybe has other goals, other audiences, and we haven't yet said what we want, it's either going to be delayed or miss the point. And so I'd like to know the process where we say we want these 5, regardless really of what you're going to do for whatever purposes, internal or external. And so how does that conversation come about?
That's a good question, Mr. Cross.
In fact, that would help me tremendously because I'm guessing and, I'm trying to think of those points where homelessness and municipal resources overlap. So, for instance, the CAP team, how many contacts does our social service coordinator make when she's traveling with the CAP team? That's a municipal sort of perspective. There's resource allocation that's happening from the municipal side. And I would actually suggest that if the committee wants to have either a time where we just sit down and brainstorm those, or send me, you're hearing from community councils, you're doing all of the work that you do. If there are things that you say, I wish I had this number to give to this group of people, we will build it around that.
Thank you, Mr. Constant.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, I would recommend that we, if it's timely, a topic of conversation at the planning session for this committee, because I think that's a core issue.
Thank you, Mr. Constant, and I agree. I think to get to Mr. Croft's point, we definitely want to be timely before this is finalized as a dashboard. Moving on to the next part of the agenda, and just Ms. Burke has outlined to me that D and E are going to have some congruence, so I am putting a timeline to allow some amount of adequate audience participation of 19 minutes for D and E. Starting now. Okay, Ms. Burke.
the memo that was included in your packet is, sorry, let me pull up this.
So it's the memo dated May 11th, 2017, titled Assembly Informational Memo.
I really want to thank everyone who worked on the ordinance drafting with me, because my approach to tell the whole story and then pull out the salient pieces that need to be together. So I wrote this memo, and Deanna's who really pulled out 5 lines and said, this is what you need to send to the assembly. Don't send that whole thing. And so I said, well, I hope it's helpful because it provides the entire background. And when we came on and started looking at allocations, many of you have heard me tell this story before about taking a look at all the different plans that covered the community, everything from the federal plan down to our Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness plan, outlining from different perspectives, the housing perspective, the federal finance perspective, and the service provision perspective, what needed to happen to end homelessness. And so I did a crosswalk of those different plans and placed them roughly into these categories that you see here. Public safety and parks is really a component that is that sort of interaction point where homeless people in the community and businesses interact. That wasn't covered in many of the plans. That was an area that really had not a lot of check marks in the boxes around activities. So as we looked at, if you look at this continuum of services, this goes from people who are out in the community. Coordinated entry is our process now that is a HUD requirement implemented by the Anchorage Coalition to End Homelessness to find people, organize their assessment, to get them queued up on a priority list and to the right program. That whole process is now starting and is pretty robust. It meets Tuesdays, has about 25 people sitting around a table talking about the process. Then looking at safety needs for people in terms of shelter, or how do we help people's immediate needs as we go through this process of getting them to housing. Then we have housing. We're working ahead and trying to find units and doing the planning around that. And then what I call coordinated staying, that's actually not what it's called, but it's that idea that once somebody's in housing, if they're coming back into the homeless service system, we really need to understand why and what we can do to better support them or to tighten up if there's a gap. So this front end of that continuum, the public safety and parks, last year we recognized that there was a pretty big time delay between the point where the community action police team goes out and gives notice to people who are camping illegally within the Anchorage Bowl. There's a legal process that happens with the notification, and then the CAP team is required to administer what's called the HART form, which is the Assistance Resource Form. And we noticed that HART form getting to the coordinated entry team had a pretty big time lag. It was about a week, sometimes 2 weeks, depending on when the outreach happened and when the meeting was happening. And so we worked with the community. Melinda Freeman is here with the health department. Their team put together some financing that we could pilot the idea of having that social service person embedded in the police team in order to tighten up that referral to social services for people found camping in the Anchorage Bowl. So the memo that you received is a long way of describing this process. The police go out, they provide the notice for camping. Social service, there's a social service workflow that's initiated from that. The CAP social service coordinator is the lead on it. She's able to make the referrals out to different agencies to get people connected in a quicker timeline. We want to shorten that time frame from when we find you in camp to when we get you to services and when we get you to housing. Those will be some of the performance measures that we probably want to monitor as a committee and as a community, because that tells us how our service system is functioning. So once the referrals are made, there is actually a place in our GIS mapping system where Tanya can indicate whether or not a referral has been successful. So now we know the police and the social service team are coordinating in lifetime on the GIS map system. Now we kick it over to the social service crew and they follow through. We get them on the prioritization list and get them to housing. That's how the whole system should work. And the memo describes some other components that we're putting into place. We have some, in reviewing the call data for the CAP team, we're able to get some more information out of their data. We've identified a pretty significant number of people who've actually never been to the shelter. They're found out camping, and these are people that are probably found south of 36. There seems to be this separation of people who go to the downtown services resources, but people who are in other parts of the community who will not go down there. And so our strategy for this summer is to increase our outreach to both those campers that are in other locations, providing additional, more technical services. The mental health team will be out. There is discussions happening through Melinda's shop now around medical students going out and providing medical outreach to those individuals, and then social services combined on top of that, getting people to housing from wherever we find them. We do not need to have a system where everybody goes from engagement to shelter to housing. We can run a two-pronged system where we get people to shelter and we get people outreach and to housing from other locations.
I know you're tight on time. Can I ask one question on that? Because it goes to our missions or measurements really and all that. So you're suggesting, I was suggesting one on the back end that is important, I think we'll do, but you're suggesting one on the front end. Is it from contact to referral? Is that the time you measure from usually a notification contact, but not always, to getting referred to at least the initial and hopefully the right social service agency? And you measure that now? Or you're starting to?
We will be able to gather some of that data from our coordinated entry system, but I'm not confident that we capture all of it right now.
Okay, but that might be an important thing to measure. Is there a similar one in the middle so if we have how many people got out and stayed out, coordinated staying as you said, and didn't need significant at least housing services for some period of time we agree on? And if there's an initial referral, how quickly do we get people in? What's a measurement in the middle? What do you guys measure, or what do you think is a measurement for how we took them from referral to housing?
Yep.
Is that the middle?
That's the interval.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Croft. Mr. Whittleton.
A couple thoughts on this. It sounds like you might be heading this way, but I mean, it says, okay, you go out there and how long you found these people and they were waiting for you to show up to take them into the system. There's some number, they don't feel like they need your help. They're just counting the same money and they're good out there. And I can't tell the difference looking at them. But I know talk to some and they go, this is what I want to be doing. And then I think the ones in parks are not the smart ones. The smart ones have found large lots in South Anchorage that are not attended by property owners, and they get to stay there as long as they want. We don't have any tools really to boot them out. It's private property, police can't do anything, code enforcement, who finds stones help. So, and those people are happy there. They don't want your service. How do you deal with that? Do we count them, or they're good?
Oh, we count them. And, the mayor's view, I wish you were still here, but the mayor's view is that this initiative is for all of Anchorage. And everyone in Anchorage has to balance what they need to do to make it. I actually hear from a fair number of people who are on the edge of not making it in apartments and say, but what about us? And that, you know, as a community, a broader conversation is around the fact that it takes about $3,000 for somebody to get into a rental unit from that location. So if they're relatively comfortable in the summertime, they'll say, yeah, I'm good. In the wintertime, you go back and you ask that question and they might be a little bit more motivated. I find the number of people that really, aside from that initial conversation, when you get down into it, well, why are you here? What led to your homelessness? People have events, and it's oftentimes trauma that they're either not ready to deal with or they're not going to share with us in a conversation, that they need help and they don't want to ask for it. So they say, yeah, no, I'm good, I'm not going to do it. Or they've failed in programs. They've tried sobriety or they've tried other things, they've failed out, and so that, you know, that the level of comfort in sharing what's really going on is pretty low, especially when they're interacting in that way in the community. I really believe there's a very small percentage of people who are in that, I don't want any help, forget it. And even those ones, okay, fine, we're coming back next week. Yeah. We'll see you then.
Thank you, Mr. Middleton. Mr. Constant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that this map actually is pretty instructive. It has the park and rec stuff, the campsites. But south of the basically Campbell Creek, you don't really see any camps. That's because, as we're just talking, this is a parks map. And so is the team able to identify and map the sites south of that creek in some way so that we can have a germane representation of what's actually happening in that part of town?
Could we ask Josh to?
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
So you're asking if south of what area?
It's Campbell Creek. If you look at the map, there's one cleared camp south of the creek. But what I just heard Mr. Welton say is that, in fact, what's happening is not that they're in the parks. They're on private large lots and not being identified. And this map wouldn't show that. Is there another map, or can that be adjunct information that can somehow be tracked? And then what the answer I would suggest to those folks would be, then you call whatever the proper people are, so that at least they can be noticed in some way, even if it can't be legally cleared, so that it gets on a map, so we have a sense of the data.
So the map does locate camps on private property, and if you're not seeing those ones in South Anchorage, that's because someone hasn't reported it through the proper mechanism to have it realized.
Thank you.
Mr. Train. Thank you.
Chairman, Campbell Creek's running not really South Anchorage. It's more midtown, and it's infested from one end of Campbell Creek to the other one. I guarantee you, I go to meetings, we say T-Bach meeting, and they say there are people on the bridge at Waldron that are playing troll with people walking over the bridge. The moment you cross the bridge, don't you give us money? And that is so bad, because what it's doing is our constituents are not going to go into Campbell Creek Park anymore. There are
Thank you, Mr.
sites along there.
Thank you, Mr. Train. But apologies, but for the purposes of time, we do have to move on to the cold weather ordinance.
Just a clarification.
Very quick.
My point was that the creek bed, Campbell Creek, is a hot spot, but south of that point, it's not. So I just wanted that to be really clear.
Thank you,
It's
Mr.
not
Johnson.
on the map.
Okay, so moving on to item E, cold weather ordinance. Ms. Burke, if you can do, or whoever's presenting on this can do a very succinct version, and then we have some time for questions.
Yeah, well, this is a little bit of the continuation of the conversation that as we move people from camps, we're asking them to go, we're trying to engage them as quickly as we can with the social services to get them to housing. We're asking them to access shelter, and so that has presented the challenge that I spoke to before about a lot more people coming to shelter, asking the shelter to do more with less, and trying to help preserve the safety of the campus is a priority. So in the wintertime, we access existing nonprofit buildings, and we're asking in this ordinance to allow for that practice to continue for the next 2 years as we continue bringing on housing with this process of moving people through to permanent housing with 2 locations, and this is only for the adult system, the Beans Cafe location and the Downtown Hope Center, which is known as the Downtown Soup Kitchen previously. I'm trying, Jerry. Every time I say it, Downtown Hope Center. so that we can continue the good work that's happening there. Both of those programs are attaching work activities to a smaller group of homeless individuals who do self-select to those locations. The Hope Center is doing a bakery and now full restaurant culinary school training, and the Beans Cafe site is doing cafeteria training and kitchen cooking. So anecdotally, the information we have from the participants who've been in these programs is it's a smaller setting, it's easier to get more relationship time with the staff, it's a better environment, and so we're simply asking for this to continue for a 2-year time frame.
Thank you, Ms. Burke. Any questions? Mr. Costa.
Thanks, sir. First a question, and then I have a proposed amendment. Does the 30-day in, 30-day out policy, is it in effect to these 2 locations?
No.
So, and just a comment to the providers, I had a lot of heated emails from folks about this issue. And the number one theme that rose up was it seems like a bit of citizenship education might be in order to the people who are consistently using the services down there. Some education on what it means to be a participant in a community. The kind of streams of trash and piles of trouble that just seem to flow consistently out of these camps and all of the co-located services around these locations that are doing a fair job, a good job, might be a point in our community where we can do some kind of education for folks, that people can understand they're part of a community even if they're feeling outside of their own spheres. So that's a pretty consistent theme that I heard the last week. And then I do have an amendment that is hopefully in front of you all, and it's not an amendment to the code of the ordinance, the actual effective language, it's to the language above, the kind of intent. And the purpose of the amendment is to change a couple of sections, and I worked with Nancy on this, I worked with the legal team on this, talked to Felix about this. I believe that Dee, when she was handed all of this material, wrote some things that she didn't understand exactly what she was saying. She thought of them more legally than kind of in the spirit of what we're saying to the community. And so I proposed an amendment that is to lines 10 to 12, and that would basically strike that first whereas and replace it with community resources for homelessness services have historically been located in the downtown region, and I could add Midtown there. If it would be...
Well, we have the rescue mission in
Yep,
Midtown.
I would be happy to add that. In Midtown region of the community, and with increasing needs for services, mitigating the impacts on neighboring community businesses and residences is a priority for planning of services. So that language is clearly in there, because it's important that we address the needs of the people who are surrounding the places where we locate the services. The second one, lines 18 to 23, and this is the heart of the matter. I was really, really, really upset. I had many calls before I had a chance to read this from the providers and from Nancy. Hey, what do you think? What do you think? And I finally read it. It was very upsetting to read this line. The one that strikes is decentralizing the homeless from established facilities leads to loss of social services for the homeless, the loss of centralizing medical services, including. The heart of that message is that we want to centralize and further ghettoize these individuals, I believe. And so rather than say that, I would like to see the whole line stricken and instead say, rewrite it so it makes logical sense. Access to medical supplies and treatment is a priority, demonstrated by the recent actions of the municipality providing immediate medical response, etc. And then the final line is amendment to line 28. Whereas the proposed ordinance is a temporary solution not intended to further centralize homeless services in the downtown area. This is very important because I could enter into a 10-minute discussion about the history of how this began. That I believe we have a body of responsibility not to create ghettos, that we need to work closely to decentralize and move individuals into natural settings in the community as much as possible. So that's the amendment that I'll be proposing. I have the Midtown language there. So I'm hoping the committee will support that.
Thank you, Mr. Constant. Any questions? Mr. Weddleston.
Well, I understand your interest in not having anything in Fairview, but isn't it seems self-evident to me too, that having people who need services close to those services is more efficient and better for everyone. And they happen to be in these areas. Are you gonna send the people to other parts of town and the services stay where they are? And that's till Uber comes to trouble.
Yeah, I would suggest there are two flaws in what I just heard. One is that nobody in Fairview is saying don't have these services here. Nobody anywhere that I know, except maybe Rowan. But what I am consistently saying, have been saying for many years, is that at some point we've created an inescapable vortex, so much density of services, so much concentration of individuals, and then the logical answer is, well, that's where the people are, so let's put the services there. Well, the services are there, so let's send the people there. Until you get essentially a geographic location in this town that is a reserve, basically a walled, an invisible walled structure that people go into and literally have difficulty and cannot escape. And so we have entered that point in time where we've created a vortex, a trap, where people are getting into that place and are not able to get out. Now we're talking third generation. No, truly this is happening. And so the answer in Salt Lake that they did was they broke their 600-person facility, which was just a nightmare and immoral, right? And that refugee crisis situation slow rolling into 4. Then they separated it. And the argument I'm making is that we're on that path, and that we need to do our best to not make a policy of the city to create a gap.
They are finding their way out because they're in town.
That's absolutely right, and it's a density issue. The volume in the downtown is overwhelming. We need help. That's what this is saying.
Okay.
Something need to be near service?
The question is, where do the services need to be? Yep. Because we're not serving them the best we can serve them anyway.
Okay, thank you. So, if there's no objection, I'm going to change the order of the day to go to audience participation. So, I'm going to open it up to the audience. If anyone wants to speak, now is your chance. Yes.
Linda Garrison, Campbell Park Community Council, the Homeless Committee. Mr. Constant, you mentioned the reporting on the camps. We are still, after a year, having problems getting the camps reported. And I understand, Mr. Chair, that you'll be working with the IT people to do that. We've been told various things. One is that you need to use a Google Chrome, but I won't get into detail. But we try to report the camps, and we have frustrated citizens who can't. There are camps south of that. There are the campers, as Mr. Weddleton has called them, which are the people who are not going to voluntarily come in. But not creating that ghetto concept, but those people, if you could move them to a place where they have their friends around them, perhaps more isolated, perhaps more out away from Anchorage, you could deal with the campers. And I don't have any solution on that, but something to consider. There are definitely 2 different groups of homeless. We had a small campfire that my husband and I went out. It was Monday evening after the T-Bop meeting, and we asked them to put it out. They ultimately did, but we are starting to have fires in the Campbell Creek Greenbelt. They moved, the homeless are moving from one camp. I have 10 camps within a half a mile of my house. One, they'll move 400 feet, and they'll just change a little bit. Those are just some of the problems, but the community council is ready, willing, and able to work with you. If we need to do something, tell us. We attended Rogers Park Community Council, and they've asked them to help them set up a homeless committee. So we'll be working with them on that. Our committee has been in existence about a year, so I know there are issues. If we're doing something incorrect or you need our help, we're here. That's all I have.
Thank you. Cal, if you can identify yourself, first name, last name, and what part of town you live in.
Cal Williams. I guess I'm with the Airport Heights Community Council. We've been around a long time talking about this homeless issue, going back to Francis Schrader, who froze to death back in 84. So I guess we started dealing with homelessness at that time. My question is, there's been a big change nationally with HUD, new administration, new philosophies, and I'm wondering how we have adjusted to that. What are we expecting? Is there going to be an improvement or for, just ask that we can prepare for this committee on making that adjustment.
Thank you. Yes.
Hi. Zach Burgess, Institute for Community Alliances. We were introduced as the contractor who works with the Homeless Management Information System, and we are a community. We work with communities to help with their data quality and to help steward the database. And so I just wanted to kind of reiterate what Nancy was saying, is that I'm hearing that there are some data points that the Assembly would like to hear. And in a previous meeting, Nancy had agreed to funnel those to us. And so there is a formal process for you to get these data points. And just want to open that up to you and let you know that that's available to you.
Thank you. Any other comments from the audience? Okay, seeing none, going back to member comments. Any member comments before we adjourn? Mr. Peterson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I've been on this committee for the last 3 years. We believe it or not, we are making progress. I know some people find it hard to see. The fact that we do have a Housing First program now that we didn't have 3 years ago helps us not only put a number of individuals, but get the names of those individuals, and so that we know where they are, so that we can connect them with services. That has put us at a beginning stage that we're now in the process of moving beyond. And so I know it seems like things are going really slowly and people are very frustrated, but I still think we are headed in the right direction. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Peterson. Mr. Constance.
Well, I agree with the trajectory. I can, just one correction, we now have 3 major Housing First facilities all within 10 blocks of my house. 3, hundreds and hundreds, 200 units, I think, total. And so we do have more than one. We just have them all in one geographic area tightly bound around the crisis services. And so we have a setup where we're telling people this is where you belong. This is the 40 acres in Anchorage that you belong in. So.
Thank you, Mr. Constance. Any other member comments? Okay, seeing none, this meeting is adjourned. Thank you.